Good afternoon. Welcome to our session. We'll be starting shortly. Everyone is on mute today, so no need to look for your mute buttons or video buttons. There's about 90 on the call so far. I probably have around 100 attend and join us for today. But Louise, I think we're ready to start whenever you are.
Thank you very much indeed, Liz. I can see from the chat that we've got Daniel with a hand up. Daniel, if you just, we're in a webinar session today, so we won't be able to see you on camera, but if you do type a message in the chat, one of the panelists will be able to get back to you and see and help you. And if anybody else is having problems or issues seeing the slides or hearing us, please let us know. And if you pop your message into the chat rather than popping your hand up, and that would and we'll make sure that one of the team gets to you to help sort your issue out. So thank you very much and welcome along to today's webinar. For those of you that haven't met me before, my name is Louise Maguire and I lead the Sustainable Farming Incentive Pilot team. So today our webinar is focused on a review of the year and what's up and coming in 2023. So before I start, I just have a slide just outlining the housekeeping for today. So if you do need help with any of the webinar functions, I've just said if you can't hear us or you can't submit a question, please let us know in the chat and one of my team will reach out and help you. So we will be answering some questions in today's session. So if you do have a question, please submit it using the Q&A button. So if you are on a computer or a laptop, the Q&A function will be at the bottom of your screen. If you're on a mobile device, it may be elsewhere, but there is a Q&A button that looks, the button's displayed on the slide. If you just click on that, and that should bring a section open where you can submit a question. What I'd advise you to do is please have a read through the questions that have already been submitted, both the open ones and the closed ones, because what you were already thinking about might have already been asked. And what we will do is give you a little bit of time to submit your questions because we may be answering the questions as we go along in today's webinar. So please do make the time to listen to the questions first. We'll answer as many questions as you can, but if we don't answer your question or you have a specific question about your pilot agreement, please either email the Rural Payments or SFI Pilot Learning, and the email addresses are there for you up on screen. We have 2 polls in today's session, but we'll let you know as soon as we get there. So I'll now hand over to Liz. Liz?
Thanks, Louise. So we're going to do a bit of a review of the year that we've had so far, 2023, and also introduce to you the feedback that we've gathered across 2023. So we're just about to release with you our year 2 participant feedback report. So it was about last year. We released our year 1. So there's a lot to build on that. And Joseph will be presenting that for you. And then we're really keen to look forward to 2024, see what upcoming events and activities we've got in store for you, the transition from the pilot onto other schemes, and some information about applying for SFI to help you on your journey. So looking back at 2023, hopefully you've attended a few of these. We've done workshops, interviews, surveys, lots of learning activities, as well as in-person and on-farm events. We've done some virtual work as well, these webinars. We did 14 series in 2023 and 38 virtual discussion groups. So hopefully you've come along to those. And of course, your learning journals and land management plans are always really useful. And of course, we've gathered information from you across all of these activities, and we'll start giving you a flavour of what we've heard shortly. Just to recap, don't forget that year 3 is continuing as normal in the pilot. You will be getting your £5,000 pilot participation payment. So hopefully many of you know that already, you're in your year 3, but we just wanted to emphasise that was the case. The pilot learning is even more important in this 3rd year as we're continuing to design actions on future schemes. So it's a really important part of our learning and co-design. So do keep doing your best to attend all the workshops and learning activities that you can. Year 3 operational side of things will be as normal. So as per year 1, you will have to submit an annual declaration and you'll have an annual change window as well. So November and December and January start dates should have been completed. And then February start dates are now open to do your annual declaration. Do keep an eye out for notifications from the RPA for later start dates. And February and March annual change windows are open now. So if you wish to make any amendments to your pilot agreement, now would be the time if you have those start dates. So just to recap that we're continuing as normal in the pilot for the 3rd year. And about the capital grants, you may have heard and been notified that the SFI Pilot capital grant scheme is now closed. That was back, I think, in September time, but not to worry, there is now available to you the CS capital grant scheme. So you can access a wider range of items. You can have a longer time to claim and claim on land that isn't in the pilot as well. So this should be a benefit for you. Some items may require advice or approvals though, so do check the guidance. You can only apply for one of each type of the CS capital grants for your farm in any year, but you may be able to apply for different types of capital grant within the same year. And if you have an existing SFI Pilot capital grant, because the scheme is closed does not mean your agreement has come to an end early. It will continue as normal until its end date or until the end of your SFI Pilot agreement. So whichever of those is first. If you've got a capital grant or have any questions, do contact the Rural Payment Agency on that email address there. So I'm going to hand over to Joseph now, who's going to take you through the participant feedback report.
Thanks, Liz. Hi, everyone. I'm Joseph in the SFI Pilot team. So the participant feedback report, like Liz said, we shared with you about 11 months ago, the year 1 participant feedback report. And we are on the cusp of sharing with you the year 2 participant feedback report. What is it? Well, so we know many of you are interested in what we've learned so far and the impact that our learning and your feedback has had on the design of the full SFI scheme. And we also want to be as open and honest with you as we can be about what we've learned. You have a right to know what we've learned so far. And so really this report sets that out. And hopefully by letting you know what we've learned so far, you can help us build on that learning in the final year. So the contents of the report, it's got an update on the pilot generally, so sort of the land, the people, the features in the SFI pilot as of November this year. Gives you an overview of the different events and activities that have taken place over the last year or two, and then importantly summarises all of the feedback that we've heard from all of you over all of those activities. That feedback is organised by themes. So it sets out what we've learned from you about all of the different operational themes like amendments and annual declarations, and then sets out what we've learned from you about all of the pilot standards and all of the actions in each of the standards. And then it goes on to a discussion or a bit of a summary about the evolution of the SFI scheme. So obviously we're testing with you guys an early version of the SFI scheme through the pilot. In 2022, we launched the SFI 22 version, which was then replaced by the SFI 23 offer. That SFI 23 offer is now the full scheme with some more stuff to come that we're building on, and your feedback and insight is feeding directly into the design of. And so the report's got quite a bit about how the design of that full SFI scheme has been massively informed by your feedback. And just to say with the report, it's been 2 years of learning absolutely loads from you. So we want to be as open as we can about what we've learned, but it's a huge amount of information. So it's quite a long report, but it's totally voluntary to read. You don't have to read it. You know, many of you would be interested in some of the content, so it's there if you want it. If you do take a look at it and read some of it, that counts towards your monthly learning time. So when you see it, there'll be a link on there for you to click, and you can just fill out your name and SBI to let us know you've read it, and then we can credit that to your monthly learning time. We'll send it to you pretty soon, probably in the next week or two. It'll be linked to a report, the document, a PDF document on the Pilot SharePoint site, so you can take a look at it online, or you can download it, print it off, and read it however you wish. You'll find when you take a look at it, so like I said, it's quite long, but the way that it's structured and presented, first page, the contents page, basically it's a series of links. So if, for example, you want to know what we've been doing and learning about the hedgerow standard, you can just open the report, click on the hedgerows button on page 1, and it will take you to that 4 or 5 page summary about the hedgerow stuff for you to take a look at. And then there's buttons on every page to sort of return you to the content. So hopefully it should be quite quick and easy for you to open up, take a quick look at the theme that you're interested in, and then close it down. What I'd like to do now is just give you a couple of examples of some of the content. So like I said, we organize the learning by different chunks. One of the chunks is operational themes. So these are the different sort of systems and processes often administered by the RPA that we go through with the RPA and that you guys go through for it to be a scheme. So that includes things like the application stage, so the systems and the online application portal, RPA processes, etc., for you guys to apply for the schemes. Agreement documents, terms and conditions, the amendments process, so that annual change window you have once a year where you can change your agreement, a lot of learning around that, which we'll do a spotlight on in a moment. Annual declarations, advice, so you know, the role that advice plays, when, why, how participants have sought advice, what could we do to reduce the need for farmers to have to pay for professional advice. A lot of learning about capital items. Obviously, capital funding is really, really important. And we've got the land management planning and the learning journals, which you've all been keeping ticking along over the last 2 years or so. And then monitoring and site visits as well. So how the RPA check that participants comply with their agreement. There's been a lot of learning around that theme. So the report sets out in a bit of detail what we've been doing and learning about all of these themes. As one example of what that looks like, we'll talk now about the amendments theme. So as you know, once a year, you can amend your agreement during your annual change period. The idea being that we want it to be flexible, and so that you can tailor your agreement around your business or your plans or your land and your ambitions. So once a year, you can change your agreement if your circumstances might have changed or your ambition has changed. We are now in year 2 of the pilot, and so everyone has been through that first annual change period. So we've been able to do quite a lot of learning about that amendments process and stage. So for example, we've done quite a few surveys with all participants. So most of you have probably at some point submitted feedback through a survey about amendments and why you made an amendment or why you didn't make an amendment. We've done a lot of interviewing, so one-to-one interviews with a researcher and a participant about when, why they made amendments or why they didn't. Quite a lot of data analysis. So this theme is quite good for data analysis, where some people good with numbers have been taking a look at all of the amendments and who's been making amendments, what sort of amendments and when, etc. Similarly, alongside learning from you guys, we've been collaborating and learning with the RPA. It's a system and process that they administer. So we've been working with them around that process, the steps that they go through, what are the blockers or the challenges, could it be made more efficient, etc. And then finally, quite a lot of feedback that we've had from you at our regional and on-farm events. So I think we've probably met most participants now in person, either on-farm or at a regional event, and those were quite rich grounds for feedback about amendments. So in terms of what we started to learn, firstly, around a third of participants have amended their agreements. So 1 in 3 opted to amend their agreement after a year in the pilot. So that's quite a large number. And I think it shows that there's quite a strong appetite amongst farmers to be able to amend the agreements that they take out. Most of those changes were to change the amount of land in the agreement. So you have the option of changing your standards or ambition levels or the amount of land in your agreement. And the significant majority of changes were to the quantity of land in your agreements. And in total, we saw the total amount of land in the pilot increase by about 3,000 hectares. I think it was 2,970 something or other, but just under 3,000 hectares net increase in the pilot. Obviously, that's a bit of a mixed bag. Some participants reduced the amount of land, most increased the amount of land. In total, we saw about 3,000 hectares added. Around half of that was to the arable and horticultural soil standard. So I think it was around 1,500 hectares or so have been added to the arable and horticultural soil standard. And again, that's a slightly mixed bag. A couple of participants will have reduced the amount of land in that standard, but most added quite a bit of land to that standard. Aside from hectareage, we've obviously got those more linear standards. So we've got the hedgerow standard, where we saw an increase of about 12.3 kilometres after year one, and an increase of about 2.3 kilometres in water bodies as well. And again, some participants reduced the amount of hedgerows, but for the most part, participants opted to increase the amount of hedgerows they had in their pilot agreement. So that's a bit of context or some of the stats. We've been working with participants to understand their experience of that process. So why did you make an amendment? How did you find the process of making that amendment? The feedback throughout all of that has been really quite mixed. So you will agree with some of the stuff that we found and disagree with some of it because everyone's opinions are slightly different. In general, after a year of implementing their agreements, I think some participants then felt more confident about what they were doing. You've had a year of doing your pilot agreement, getting your head around your standards, working out, how they fit with your land and how you're going to implement them. And essentially reached the point where you thought you could probably do a little bit more of that. In terms of the process itself, again, really mixed bag of responses. I think we found slightly more participants described it as a complicated process than those who described it as a straightforward process, something like a 48-52 split almost. So as you probably know, to make your amendment request, you send an email to the RPA setting out your business details and the amendment that you want to make, which the RPA then process and eventually come back to you to amend your agreement. Sometimes, though, that wasn't the end of the story, and participants had to enter a bit of a negotiation or a bit of a discussion with the RPA to work out exactly what amendment they could make and eventually get that put through into the agreement. Despite that, rarely have participants used advisors to make the amendment request. So for the most part, those of you who made an amendment to your agreement, you didn't pay for an advisor or an agent to do it on your behalf. And a common theme of feedback we've heard throughout is that overall the process took too long. So the time between you sending the RPA an email requesting an amendment and you seeing that amendment reflected in your agreement took too long overall. So I think a key thing that we've taken away is that what we're working towards, the overall approach there with amendments and annual change windows is right, and it's a good thing for us to be doing. But the nitty-gritty of how we do so and the processes within and the steps that we take, there's clearly room for improvement to make it more efficient and streamlined and reduce that time lag between your request and actually seeing the amendment made. We also spoke to participants who didn't make an amendment to understand why not. Obviously, a large chunk of those participants is just because they're content with their agreement as is. You don't want to make an amendment. But we do know that some participants were considering making an amendment or wouldn't be opposed to making an amendment, but essentially opted to not make an amendment, either due to concerns about the amount of time that it would take to do the amendment or concerns about potentially risking delays to their payments. So whilst the actual risk of delays to your payments as a result of an amendment request are really low, the fear of that taking place has prevented some of you from making your amendment request. And obviously that's not right. The problems with our process are preventing some of you from having an agreement that you want and that's tailored around your business. So just sort of reinforces the importance of making this process more efficient and reducing your fears about it becoming a really long, intensive administrative process that risks delays to your payments. So that's a little spotlight on amendments, a lot more detail about all of that in the report. Alongside the operational themes, a massive chunk of our learning has obviously been about the standards themselves and each of the actions within the standards. So obviously we've got 8 standards in the pilot. Each of those standards is a bundle of different land management actions. And we've done a huge amount of learning about all of these standards, some really, really interesting insights, and it's been really, really important in helping to design that full SFI scheme and the actions in that SFI offer for 2023. I'll just give you one example, just to give you a flavour of what you'll see in the participant feedback report. So a bit of a spotlight on the hedgerow standard. And we chose this one because it's the most popular standard, so more of you are doing this standard than any other standard. What we've got in the participant feedback report is a few stats around the uptake of the standard, so you can see at the bottom of the slide. Don't worry about trying to make too much sense of it, but essentially we've got some stats about the uptake of the standard by region. So you can just see there, the Southwest, loads of you doing the hedgerow standard, fewer in the Northeast, Uptake by sector, so about a third of participants doing the hedgerow standard are grazing livestock, about a quarter of them are mixed, and then uptake by farm size as well, so just under 300 participants with farms under 100 hectares are doing the hedgerow standard. And at the top there, we've got about how we've learned about the hedgerow standard. So similarly with amendments, we've done that magical mix of surveys, workshops, interviews, regional on-farm events, and data analyses. The good thing about that mix of different research types is that through the interviews and also the workshops, we get really rich, detailed, qualitative feedback from participants. And then surveys are our opportunity to almost test or validate some of those insights, go out to a larger number of participants, check that what we've heard in the interviews or the workshops is true, is that reflective of what participants think, and really sort of build on those qualitative insights with more quantitative data sets. And so far over the 2 years, we've got really robust, massive data sets about how the hedgerow standard is working for you guys and your farms. Let's take a next slide, Liz. So in terms of the feedback we've heard about the hedgerow standard, in the participant feedback report, we've structured the feedback around, firstly, common themes of feedback about the standard overall. So generally, what have you told us about how the hedgerow standard is working on your farm, in terms of how you implement it, the environmental impacts of it, the payment rates and that sort of stuff, overall themes. And then we get into the sort of specific feedback about the specific actions within each standard, like the buffer strips action. So in terms of the hedgerow standard, for example, generally, participants have viewed it pretty positively over the last 2 years and generally described it as straightforward to implement, even at the advanced levels of ambition. And generally, participants have said it's a pretty good fit with their existing farm practices. And we're already starting to hear from participants who are seeing quite noticeable positive impacts on wildlife and biodiversity, increases in berries and insects, for example, and birds. A couple of participants had increases in birders coming to look at their birds. What I would say is these are general statements for participants overall. So some of you might not think as positively or think it's not that straightforward, but generally on the whole, most participants describe it as being straightforward to implement and view it as positively, etc. A really important thing that we've heard over the last 2 years is about hedgerow mapping data. So about a quarter of participants have described to us or reported that there are issues with the RPA's hedgerow mapping data about their farm. And that's really important because not only is that a bit of an administrative headache for you, where you might have to then do your RLE1 form or discuss with the RPA to update that data, but it's actually around a third of participants who reported those issues entered fewer hedgerows into the scheme than planned. And so that means an avoidable problem with our data has meant that there are fewer hedgerows in the pilot being protected and enhanced by the hedgerow standard than there would have been otherwise. So it's really important for us, something we're looking at, sorting out that mapping data with the full scheme. Another thing we've heard throughout as well is consideration for the ancient hedgerows, regional hedgerow variations like Cornish or Devon hedgerows. And again, I think you're seeing the SFI 23 handbook, that's now accounted for. And I think we've done a better job of considering those different ancient and regional variations to hedgerows in the full scheme as a result of your feedback. So moving on from the common themes of feedback overall, and again, that's just a really quick spotlight. We then have feedback about the specific actions. So one of the actions in the hedgerow standard at the more advanced levels of ambition is implementing a buffer strip alongside the hedgerows. Now, buffer strips are really, really positive for wildlife, and some of you are starting to report those benefits to wildlife. Generally, we have heard that the management that's permitted within your grass buffer strips is sufficiently flexible. So there's enough scope within there for you to do it in a way that works for you and your business. And generally, the rules around where you need to position the buffer strips have also been described as sufficiently flexible as is. We have heard, though, that where you have management control of just one side of your hedgerow, so some participants' hedgerows either delineate a road or a neighbour's farm, there has been some uncertainty around the requirements or what's expected of you where you've only got management control of one side, particularly so in year one at the outset. And then obviously after a year or so, you're kind of getting your head around that stuff a bit more. But I think some lessons learned there for us about the guidance. In terms of the buffer strips themselves, so some of you had pre-existing buffers, either because that's the way you like to farm or because you other scheme involvement, etc. But many of you are implementing new buffers. Those new buffer strips are either being, for the most part, placed on your least productive land, or where you think that have the most positive impact for wildlife. So probably what you'd expect makes sense. And then another really important theme of feedback we've heard about the buffer strips is the impact on those of you with smaller farms or smaller fields. So if, say, you are implementing a 6-meter buffer strip all around the perimeter of a relatively small field, that's quite a large proportion of that field's productivity taken out for a buffer strip. And so again, I think the way that the actions work in the full SFI scheme, whether on a per hectareage basis, and you can decide exactly how many hectares of buffer strip you will implement on that field parcel, will hopefully help to negate that issue. So again, really quick spotlight on the hedgerow standard, a huge amount more detail on all of the learning about the operational themes and standards in the report, and I recommend that you take a look if you're interested in any of it. Another section of the report is about our evaluation of the environmental impacts, which is still an ongoing process. So it's not the full results, but more like an interim flavour. You might recall or be aware that in 2022 and early 23, we had some scientists come out onto some pilot farms and carry out some field surveys. So during those field surveys, these scientists spoke to participants just to understand how they were implementing their standards and their actions. And then importantly, assess the habitat conditions. And they assessed the habitat conditions of land where the standards were being or were going to be implemented, as well as land where the standards are not being implemented. And in 2024, next year, they'll be back out on participants' farms to assess habitat conditions again of land under standards and land not under standards. And then we can compare how the habitat conditions of land under standards compares with the habitat condition change on land not under standards. So that gives some really, really important insights and evidence around the impact of the pilot standards on habitats and wildlife and biodiversity over a 3-year cycle or a 3-year period. As you all know, though, a lot of the environmental impacts that we're striving to achieve here, like air quality or carbon storage or water quality, are long-term effects, and it's unlikely you're going to see discernible improvements over a 2 or 3 year period. So that's when we use modeling. And so we've got some clever computer machinery stuff that's beyond my comprehension, some modeling that predicts these longer term impacts. So it takes the baseline data from those field surveys and then models the likely impacts over 5 and 25-year periods of the standards on things like agricultural pollution emissions and air quality, carbon storage, and water quality. And I won't get into the detail here. This is spoken about a lot more in the report. But just generally, the prediction is that the SFI pilot standards and actions will have a significantly positive effect on reducing agricultural pollution emissions, particularly sediment, phosphorus, and nitrate. And similarly, will have a hugely positive effect on air quality, carbon storage, and water quality. And you can probably just see there on the graph in the bottom right, particularly air quality over a 25-year period. So it's really promising for us that these pilot standards, you know, the learning we do with you guys, it's all about, does it work for you? Does it work for food production? And this is where we're really looking at whether it works for the environment too. And it looks like it's on the right track, which is really promising. I know a lot of you are probably quite interested in this topic, and it's not something we've had the chance to speak with you about much so far. So if this is something you want to talk more about or hear more about, then just let us know, and we'd be very happy to have other sessions or provide more information, etc. Next slide, please, Liz. So just finally, the other section of the report for you to be aware of is the evolution of the SFI and the role of pilot learning in that. So like I said, we had SFI 2022, we've got the early version of SFI in the pilot, and now we've got the full SFI scheme through that SFI 23 offer. It's been a bit of a confusing journey for you and us, but we now are at this full SFI scheme that we're building on. And that design, the contents essentially of that SFI 23 handbook, throughout it, there have been significant changes and improvements as a result of what we've learned in the pilot. And it would take a couple of weeks to talk through all of it. So I'll just give you some quick examples now, but I recommend reading the section in the report or the participant feedback report if this is something you're interested in. But just for example, the application system and portal massively improved because of participants' feedback. The eligibility requirements throughout the full SFI scheme, far more flexible now because we have consistently heard from you all about the need for greater flexibility, and that's eligibility for the scheme generally. That's eligibility for specific actions or grassland actions, for example. Grassland actions now, the eligibility, you don't need to go out with a quadrant and find 9 species of grass. You can now be eligible for the actions based on how you want to manage the land. The move to pick and mix actions, a big change. So we've moved away from bundling actions into a standard, and now you can pick the actions that you want to do, and you don't have to pick the actions that you don't want to do. So you can more precisely tailor those SFI agreements around your business and your land. And those actions are on a per hectare basis. So unlike in the pilot, where if you're doing, say, the arable and horticultural land standard, your whole land parcel is in that standard. In the full SFI scheme now, you can precisely select the amount of hectares on that parcel that you'd like to do on the specific actions. The agreement documents and terms and conditions, much clearer and more concise. The guidance, generally clearer and simplified throughout. We've heard a lot from you about the need for clarity and distinction between what's mandatory and what's optional, and we've done that. And I'd say one of the most common pieces of feedback I've heard from participants over the last 2 years is wanting guidance in a single PDF printable document, which it is, the SFI 23 handbook. Evidence documents as well. So we know evidence documents are really complex sometimes, things like nutrient budgets and plans or soil assessments, they're not easy for your average farmer to do. So we've standardized them. And we've also now revised the payment rates to reflect the cost of paying for the professional advice or support that you use. Payment rates, quarterly payments were introduced in the pilot as a new thing. We've heard really positive feedback from you all, so we're continuing with the quarterly payments. We've also published online the key principles that sort of underpin the payment rates. I won't talk through them now, but I'd recommend taking a look at them in the participant feedback report if you'd like to. But just generally, just to say, it's obviously we want to encourage wide participation whilst paying you fairly. We also need to prioritize achieving multiple environmental outcomes where we can, so it's bang for your buck from the public's perspective. Also recognise that some of you, prior to the environmental land management schemes, were already doing work to protect and enhance natural assets, and it's about recognising that, and also about recognising that this is part of a growing market where you can get public and private sector funding for environmental outcomes on your farmland. And SFI is just one part of that market, so it has to be sort of join upable so that you can access all the different sources or streams of potential funding. And then finally, just on payments, they're always under review. So as you roll out and evolve this SFI scheme, the payment rates and everything really in the SFI offer is under review. The supportive and pragmatic approach to checking farmers comply with their agreements, so like the site visits and the monitoring from the RPA, it's been a new approach we've been trialing in the pilot. And like other operational themes, I think we found it's the right approach, it's the right thing to try and do, but there's clearly some room for improvement in the details and how we do so. And then throughout the offer, there's some smaller changes to the actions and how they're presented and written about. And so hedgerows, for example, the hedgerow cutting regime in the pilot, the reduced cutting regimes, whilst it's really beneficial for wildlife, for some of you that doesn't work with the way that you farm or your business, etc. And so you'll see in the SFI 23 offer, there's a greater range of options around hedgerow management regimes. We also know that when you joined the pilot, many of you had to do a bit of an assessment of your hedgerows, either to count the trees, measure the widths or height, or check the amount of gaps. That in itself is an administrative cost. And so now you'll see in the full SFI scheme, we introduced HRW1, a hedgerow condition assessment. So you'll get paid for doing that assessment you told us about. And the buffer actions are amalgamated as well. So instead of a hedgerow buffer and a water body buffer with slightly different rules, there's one buffer action. You can do it on arable and horticultural land, or you can do it on improved grassland. And it can be placed alongside a wide variety of different landscape and farming features. So you don't just have the option to do it against hedgerows or water bodies, you can do it against woodland or fencing or trackways, etc. So that's a really quick whistle-stop tour. Absolutely loads of changes. Your feedback has been a huge, huge positive impact on the design of the SFI 23 offer. If you're interested in more, I'd recommend taking a look at the participant feedback report. If you do read the participant feedback report or take a look, we'd love to know what you think. Feel free to email us with your feedback or comments. And that's it. Thanks for your time. And I'll hand back to Liz, who I think is going to take a look ahead.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks so much, Joseph. So with all that in mind, what's happening as we move forward to 2024? So firstly, an important bit of news is cross-compliance is ending. So as part of the agricultural transition, BPS and the cross-compliance will both end on the last day of this month, so the last day of the year. The rules will continue, though, as these cross-compliance rules are now part of English domestic law, so they'll continue to apply. They continue to be enforced by existing regulators, and so it's something for you to continue to adhere to and follow those rules. There's quite a lot of information on our blog on gov.uk. So we've put a blog link into our chat. Do take a look at that. So that will explain it in a little bit more detail. And also BPS will end, but it is being replaced from the 1st of January with delinked payments. They'll continue up to 2027, and then after 2027, as part of the agricultural transition, as you know, those payments will end as well. So just to keep you up to date with some rules changing, although you should know many of those already. So what have we got for 2024? Very much a similar pattern to what we've done over the 2023. We've got more virtual discussion groups for you, webinars like this to keep you updated and informed as soon as we can with any information. In-person events, some on-farm events too, and our regular newsletter. And in terms of learning, again, it's informed our participant feedback report really well. So we'll be continuing with surveys and workshops and interviews to get those deep dives and validation samples. Keep up to date your learning journals, do continue those, and we'll do some on-farm learning events as well. In terms of themes of our learning, we'll be looking at transitions, how that's going for you to other schemes. We'll do some further exploration on the pilot impact and the impact on the environment and on your business. Some costs information as well that we want to delve into a little bit more, as well as continuing with learning about how the 3rd year of your standards delivery has been going, any changes, improvements, declines, and things like that. And early in 2024, we wish to share with you a tracking survey. So that will be something for you to keep an eye out for. As you are coming to the end and the last year of the pilot, your next steps are really important to us. And we really want to help you move on to other schemes. So we have a transition toolkit on SharePoint. We use it to update information for you regularly. And at the moment, it has some SFI application videos. It's got information about the current SFI offer and our compatibility chart, which I'll talk with you shortly, and links on where to get advice at this kind of turning point as well, if you feel you need to for your business. So there's links on where to get advice from catchment sensitive farming and the Farming Resilience Fund as well. So we'll put a link into our chat for our transition toolkit. Do keep an eye on that, and it will be updated regularly. But not forgetting all of the things on the last slide. So all of our information webinars, our newsletters, we'll be using all of this to support you with your transition as well as you move on beyond the pilot. And just to draw attention back to the blog again, there has been a recent video blog about accessing free business advice. So do take a look at that one. And we've talked a lot about SFI, and I know you're really keen to understand, well, who's getting involved? Should I? Is there good take up? And so far we've had 7,000 applications that have been started in the system. So this is statistics from the 3rd of December. So it's almost a week and a half out. So this possibly might have changed already. We've had 4,000 applications submitted, and these are rising by hundreds each week, possibly, around 400 or 500 a week. We have 2,500 agreements that have started. So some interesting stats that this now covers of the applications that have been started anyway, over 5.5 of farmland in England, which is a real positive move, especially as the applications have only been open for a couple of months. And we've had 100 pilot participants that have applied for SFI, and over half of these agreements have started as well. And we really wanted to understand your experience, particularly those that have applied for SFI, to see how it was going for you. Obviously, we can see how the pilot has affected and made changes ready for SFI, but how was it actually for you going through the pre-application and application process? So the farmers we spoke to in these interviews told us that they wanted to apply for SFI, because they could stack now on top of their pilot agreement. So they could stack some SFI actions without making any changes to their pilot agreement. And in a lot of cases, those actions were ones they were doing anyway. So it felt like a real good way to get the finances in now, because they were doing those already. So that felt quite positive. For many, agreements were starting the first of the month after they'd confirmed them with the RPA. So again, slightly more timely than we've been in previous schemes, and the pilot included. The one tip was to make sure that you check your land use codes in the raw payment system before you start applying, just to make sure they're right. You might have to delve into the detail there to make sure you're able and eligible to access the actions that you'd like. We've got a link to this video. It's in our transition toolkit, and it should helpfully talk you through how to check those. So that was one tip from those farmers that have applied for SFI already. They used the handbook and the compatibility chart, and I'll show you that. And again, we link that as well. And everyone that we were interviewed was happy to stay in the pilot as well. So just to give you a flavour of how it's been going for pilot farmers. So the SFI agreement will be separate to your pilot agreement, as we've discussed. And as I've kind of hinted, you can stack onto your pilot agreement now. You may wish to, in an amendment period, make amends to your pilot agreement so you can accommodate more SFI actions, or you can add SFI to land that isn't in the pilot. So if you are looking to stack, then do be aware of these 3 green bullet points. So firstly, as you'd imagined, the land must be eligible for the actions you wish to select. And again, keep an eye out for the land use codes there. If you have any problems applying, it could link back to those. The activities or outcomes that you're being paid for in each scheme are compatible with each other. We've got some information to help you with this. And you can't be paid twice for a similar action on the same piece of land. So that would be double funding. So do take those into account. And as identified in the agricultural transition update in January this year, there are a range of additional actions that we're looking to review and include in our expanding offer. So we're working towards including these actions in SFI for next year, and we will be sharing information with you early next year on what the ins and outs of them will be, and the payment rates and next steps, really. So many of you may be interested in precision farming techniques, and that's something that will be included in the 2024 offer. There'll be tillage practices, including no-till and direct drilling, access, so including permissive, existing, expanding and educational access, some agroforestry, floodplain meadows, and then managing scrapes and gutters for waders and wintering birds. Boundaries such as dry stone walls, and now this has been a popular one. We know, and many of you, particularly in the north, may be keen to access this, and the coastal cliff habitat. So, like I say, watch this space, and as soon as we know, we can share information with you going forward. And just to touch on the stacking, we've shown this at a couple of webinars and events, but just to highlight that IPM1, NUM1 and HRW1 are all actions that you can stack on top of your pilot agreement, whatever standards that you have. And then the grey box is showing those which have more selective compatibility. So just want to check a little bit more, but have general good compatibility with our pilot standards. And here's our compatibility chart. Again, it's in our transition toolkit, so the link should be in the chat for that one. And you can see the general gist that HRW1, IPM1 and MU1 can go on any standard currently, and then the limited or non-compatibility of other actions. Again, you might have seen this a few times, so I will skip on through. And on to the Q&A session. We have around 150 of you on this session today, and we'll do our best to answer what we can. But I'm going to hand over to Louise to help host and chair our Q&A session.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed, Liz. And just before we go any further, I'll give people the time to have a look at the questions, and just please be aware that some of the questions have already been answered. So please do have a look in the open and the answered questions. So I'll give people a bit of time to do that. But I just wanted to give a huge thanks out to Liz and to Joseph today. They have led the session today, and I think it's really nice to hear from other members of the team. So thank you very much for doing that. That was brilliant. And we hope that information's been really useful to you. I know a number of you may say to me, Louise, this is information we've already heard, but we still keep on getting questions about how are we still getting our pilot participation payment in year 3, and other similar questions about applying for SFI 23. So we thought it would be really helpful just to put this webinar on, collate that information and just replay it back so that everybody knows what the position is and where we're up to. So I can see a number of attendees have got their hands up. Unfortunately, I can't come to you today to voice over your question because we've got no audio available. So please, if you are struggling to answer the Q&A or access the Q&A, please pop your question in the chat and I'll try and get to you. So hopefully everybody's had the opportunity to have a read through the Q&A and pop the questions on. I think we've got around 10 minutes, so maybe just a little bit longer, just to take a few of these questions. So I'll go with the open questions first, and then I'll perhaps try and voice over some of the answered questions. So panelists, please be aware that I may be coming to you to help me answer some of these questions. So the first question we've got is from Matthew. And Matthew says, we've got a predominantly arable farm. What would be the best time of year to start an SFI agreement? So Matthew, I think our advice to you would be it's entirely up to you, and that's why we've had the rolling start dates, and it's completely what works for you and your farm business, what existing agreements you may already have on the farm, when your cycle of planting, when you review that, and what fits best with you. So I would advise anybody just to have a think about their farm business, their review points, how they go about that, and have a real think about when's best for you, because the system that we are using now gives you the flexibility to decide when it is that you want to. Just be aware that the agreement starts on the 1st of the month after you accept your offer. So you just need to have a think about that. I think at the moment, RPA are turning offers round in between 3 to 4 weeks, but it depends if there is some complexities with your agreement. For example, if you've got another laid on agreement, and we may need to get some clarification on that. So that's the only thing that you need to be aware of. Sam, was there anything that you wanted to add to that? Sam, you're on. I can't hear you.
Is that better? Does that work?
That's better.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So I think, yeah, no, the only other thing just to consider, it might depend on the actions that you want to select, particularly if you're looking at ones where they could be rotational. So if you want to put in rotational actions into your agreement, it's just worth sort of considering, when you make the decision about what you put on your land, when you plant for the agreement year, because as in the pilot, we give you 12 months to deliver the action, but you've got to sort of look at that. If your agreement runs from, say, April to April, or September to December to September, then you've just got to sort of look at where you're going to be within your rotation and sort of cropping changes. So, but as Louise said, it is about trying to be flexible to make it work for the business and when you really want to apply, as opposed to us having sort of a fixed date in the year like we have with our existing countryside stewardship mid-tier or even BPS.
Thanks very much, Sam. That's really helpful. So if we can move on to our next open question, which is one from Anne. It's a really good question. And this question is, will we be able to apply for the main SFI scheme before our pilot comes to an end, and specify a start date? And again, David's backed this one up. So I think this is a great question. So I think the pilot agreements are all for 3 years. They won't be continuing after the 3 years, and we'll be looking to transition and support you into a new agreement. So you'll see the offer that's on board at the minute in terms of countryside stewardship, but also our main offer that we had in 23. You know that we'll be adding to that offer next year, so there will be more available. So I think there's a couple of ways that you can do this. If you want to wait until your agreement ends in 3 years, at the minute there will be a gap because it will show that your land is currently in a pilot agreement when you apply for SFI 20, when you apply for SFI. What we are trying to do is work with the RPA to see if there is any way that we minimise or eliminate that gap so that it'll show that yes, they're in a pilot agreement, but that comes to an end and you could apply so you have a seamless transition, so you have no gap in your agreement. So we are working with the RPA on that, and when we know more, we will let you know. But that is what we would like to happen so that you do have a seamless transition. If you are partway through your pilot agreement and wish to terminate one or more of your standards to enter into the offer for 23, you can also do that. And the best way to do that is through your annual change period. So your annual change period will depend on the start date, because some people's agreements started in October, some people started in June. But what you can do is through your annual change period, you can ask us to take out the standards, or even if you wish to terminate your whole agreement, and then you can apply for SFI following the termination or the taking out of the standards that you wish to remove from your pilot agreement, if that's what you wish to do. Sam, any clarifications that you wanted to add on to that one? Sam, we're having trouble with audio again.
Yeah, no, I think that's all fine. I think there is a range of sort of different scenarios, you know, as to when you might want to apply and how to do it with your pilot agreements. And obviously that, you know, as we expand the offer, that could change again. So it's worth sort of just considering that before thinking about applying.
Excellent, thanks, Sam. So we've got next open question we've got is from Anthony. I'm thinking about taking my SFI pilot straight into countryside stewardship. Any advice on timings, windows for applications such as the gaps that the two are minimised? We have a November SFI pilot. So I think, Anthony, we just talked about how that might work, and our advice, if you do have an agreement to and you do want to make changes, to submit that through your annual change period. I think by the sounds of it, you're still looking at the offer. Obviously we've got the offer out there that's that we've got for 2023, but we do know that we're adding to that offer next year, so you may wish to have a look at that offer. What I'd also advise people is we've put the link in the chat, but do have a look at our transition hub, because we're hoping that that will have all the information in there that you'll need to make your transition as swift as you possibly can and to help you with that transition. So I'd advise you to have a look at that. Sam, anything you wanted to add to that one?
Come off mute this time. So no, I think the only thing I was going to say is I don't think, and Louise, you may correct me if I'm wrong, but we put out the dates for CS opening for 2024 yet. So I would keep an eye out for those so that you can see those dates as well, because that could be quite important. Because obviously traditionally countryside stewardship mid-tier agreements then start on the 1st of January, and we have that application process sort of later in the year, but we haven't published those dates yet, so it would be keeping an eye out for those as well.
Thank you very much, Sam. So we've got a question from Christine. What is the current average time taken, please, from submission to agreement acceptance? So this is a really good question. I think I voiced that over before. I think on average it was, if the application was straightforward, it was taking between 3 to 4 weeks. But if anybody in the team has any update on that, please do feel free to come in. Thank you. So I'm going to take another couple of questions, and I think Liz has got a poll that we're going to launch. So I'll just I'll take 2 more questions, Liz, if that's okay, and then we'll launch the poll, and then we can go back if we've got any more questions. So we've got another question from Jonathan. Can you give a timeline on the 2024 standards I want to apply for, but would you prefer to include these in the new agreement? I think that those are the new actions that we're going to offer in 2024. So at the moment, we haven't published any dates about when they are going to be available. So I've been to a webinar recently where we have said that it could be summer 2024, but we need to work through deliverability of those, but it will definitely be within 2024. So unfortunately, I can't give you a precise date on that, but watch this space. Sam, anything you wanted to add to that? we'll take one more question from Jane. Will we be able to add in actions as and when they become available and not wait until the annual amendment window? So Jane, I'm assuming you mean this too if you enter into a new SFI agreement. So it's exactly the same as your pilot works. So you can add in actions at your annual amendment window during your annual change period. So if you wanted, if you had land coming out of an existing scheme and you wanted to add them in, or if you wanted to add more of your fields into your 23 agreement, you can do that at your annual window. So you have to wait until that period. Sam, anything you wanted to add to that before we launch the poll? Thanks, Sam. Liz, over to you. Do you want to launch the poll?
Yeah, thanks, Louise. It's just really useful for us to understand if you're looking to join SFI 2023, and if so, when. If you're looking to do that now or when your pilot agreement ends, just to make sure that we're bringing out to you information as you need it, rather than assuming that you're not applying or you're applying at the end. So this is just a helpful poll for us. And also a poll that we've run a couple of times, so we can see if there are changes in how you are at the moment. So hopefully you've got a grasp of how to do polls in our webinars. It's nothing too scientific, so if you're unable to click or see a poll, don't worry. Hopefully the majority of you can. The question is, are you planning to join SFI 2023? And if so, when? No, being if you're not looking to apply. So if you're looking to stack on your pilot agreement, or when your pilot agreement ends. So we've had about 110 poll there, so that's really useful. Thank you ever so much. Oh, there's still a few more coming in. Just hang on 10 seconds.
Thanks, Liz. Liz, we've also had some feedback that none of the choices are covered in the 3 options that we've given them. So if people want to just let us know either in the chat or in response to their question what their other option would have been, please let us know.
Fantastic, definitely. Yeah, it's not too scientific, just to get a vibe of how you're feeling. So this is really useful for us. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Liz. And there are the results. You can see that 8% said no, 45% are looking at stacking on top of your existing pilot agreement, and 40% said so. A very even split between those stacking on top of your pilot agreement and those entering into the Sustainable Farming Incentive Based Scheme when your pilot comes to end. So really good. Thank you very much. And as I said, if you did have anything to add, please do let us know in the chat or in response to your question. So what I may do, we've got one open question that I'll come to in a moment, and I may voice over some of the answered questions. Liz, just remind me, how much time have we got left?
We can run till 15:15. We've made sure we've got that amount of time.
Thank you. That's really helpful. So what I'll do is I'll take the open question that we've got, and then I might voice over some of the answered questions and come through to the team to see if there's anything that I have missed in the chat. So the first open question, we've got some great feedback from Christine on no-till and direct drilling. So thank you for that. We'll take that into account and make sure we pass that on. But we've got a question about, will derogation still be in place for the 23 scheme? So I'd say look at the guidance online. Derogations is there where there is an unexpected event, and it helps us to determine what you can do in terms of that those unexpected events. So derogations will still be available, but the guidance is all online. Sam, anything that you wanted to answer to that? Thank you. Then we've just got 1 or 2 more open questions. So I'll just have an opportunity to read through those, and then we can, and then I'll turn to the answered question. So we've got one from Charlie. Can we make a separate application for 23 and leave our pilot agreement running? Yes, of course you can, Charlie. And a lot of we've heard that a lot of our pilot farmers are doing that. They are making a separate application either to stack on top of their existing agreement and do the same if the actions are compatible, or on land that they've got that's not in any agreement and they want to build 23. So yes, you can absolutely do that. some people who can't decide what to do, whether to go into countryside stewardship or to go into SFI. So I think read the information that we've got available on the Transition Hub. Hopefully that will help you steer you in the right direction. There's also advice available through the Farming Resilience Fund. So if you haven't had that, I know I've had some great feedback from some of our pilot farmers who have already took up that option. So that's available. An advisor can come out to your farm and talk about whatever you want to talk about to help you with your farm business, and it may be related to the delivery of environmental outcomes, or it might be about how you improve productivity. But we've had feedback from a number of farmers that have took up that offer, so that might be something that you want to have a look at to help look at where you go after the pilot if you wish to use it in that way. So I think we're getting quite a few questions in now, but what I'll do is turn to the answer questions and just voice some of those over. Liz, Joseph, was there any questions in the chat where people couldn't answer them in the Q&A?
No, just a couple of questions, a couple of comments about the poll.
Excellent, brilliant. Thank you. So I will try and look at some of the ones that are not quite specific and would apply to everybody. We've got lots of feedback, so thank you very much for your feedback. We've got some questions about some of the research we did, the free choice exercise. So we've answered that in the chat, and we're hoping to bring you the results of that study very soon, and what that meant for you. So please bear with us on that one, and thank you for those of you that participated in that. Sam, are there any questions that you can see that it would be helpful to voice over?
I'm just looking to see if there's ones that we haven't already covered, because there's a few similar ones that are on themes that we've already covered. There is one about deadlines for SFI, so we 23 for applying, so there aren't any specific deadlines because it is a rolling application, although as we did for 22 there may well be at some point sort of a slight pause when we sort of load on new things. So when we look to expand the offer, sometimes we will pause it, and sometimes there are sort of very short pauses if we need to make sort of changes to the system or upgrades. But generally the plan is that it will be a rolling application window, so you can apply whenever you want to. So there's not a sort of a hard and fast deadline.
Thanks, Sam. We've got a good question about double funding in SFI, the Sustainable Farming Incentive offer for 2023, and what we will allow, particularly bringing in private sector funding. So we've answered that question in the chat, but I'll just voice it over. For the 23 offer, you can enter the same area land into an agreement where there's private sector scheme arrangement, and you can see more in the handbook about what that looks like. Sam, anything you wanted to add to that position?
That's fine.
Sam, do let me know if there's any of the answered questions that it would be useful to. I'll just quickly scan the open questions to see if there's anything that we haven't answered. I know the team are busily trying to answer some of the questions as I speak.
Louise, there were some questions about, I think, just going back to the timescales for the applications and having those sort of processed. I think it is very much improved, certainly from when we were all applying through the SFI pilot, but some of those will also depend upon individual circumstances. So will depend upon sort of how much land you're putting in, if there are any complications, like if you've got other schemes already running, so they've got to do like the compatibility checks as well, and also if you've got any designations like SSSI type designations, and the number of actions. So it will depend. So the more you put in, or the more complex the application, it is going to take longer to do. But they've, as Liz said in the statistics, we've got literally hundreds coming in every day and processing them. So we are definitely improving on the timescales for turning them round. But if you submit a more complicated one, it could take a bit longer.
Thanks, Sam. We've got a couple of questions in the chat for people requesting the link to SharePoint. I know people have answered it in the Q&A, but could somebody post the link in the chat to the SharePoint so everybody's got that to access? I think that would be helpful so everybody's got that. We've got a good question from Jennifer. I've stacked on my pilot agreement with a new 2023 SFI agreement. I now want to put hedges in. Do I make a fresh agreement or add it into my 2023 agreement? So I think you've got options there, Jennifer. I think you could, depending on when your annual change period is, you could add it into your pilot agreement, or you could add it into your SFI 23 agreement. If none of those work for you, obviously the hedge offer is slightly different in the pilot to what's on offer in 23. So I'd advise you to have a look at the offers and which one suits your farm business the best. I think if none of the timescales align to when you want to put it in, you can enter another 23 agreement. So you can make another application. So you can have 2 live SFI 23 applications running at the same time if none of the timescales align. You just need to be aware, though, that you don't get your management payment on a second SFI agreement for the same SBI. Sam, anything you wanted to add to that?
No.
Anything else in the chat that we've missed?
I see we've got a question from Andrea about the new biodiversity net gain schemes, which Louise, I don't know whether you want to take, or I'm happy to answer that one.
Yeah, it's a good question. Sam, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, so I think the main principles are that we're obviously trying to make things as flexible, and certainly at the moment with the offer that we've got for SFI, you are able to enter into other schemes, including those schemes. I think what you know, those schemes are sort of developing, and so that is under review. I think, but some of it will come down to the sort of our general principles of sort of stacking schemes, you know, the eligibility, compatibility, and double funding. So with some of those schemes, if we're paying to sort of deliver actions and outcomes through SFI, you may not be able to benefit from those through a second scheme if it's the same outcomes. But if you've got other areas of land or other areas of sort of outcomes that are not specifically supported through one scheme, then the two can run together. So we are sort of working as we develop these sort of different offers, you know, based on different sort of things that they can run together. But we do have those principles. So I think you've always got to bear those principles in mind, that if we're paying for an outcome through one, then you know, we wouldn't be able to pay for exactly the same thing through a different scheme. And that also goes for you know, some of the private finance schemes around. We're trying to make it as open as possible. So we're certainly saying if you're in any private finance scheme, then you can enter SFI. That's fine from our perspective. But some of those schemes may have sort of terms and conditions themselves in terms of their eligibility compared to if you're in one of our farming and countryside program schemes.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed, Sam. So before we close, Liz, have we got any more polls that I've missed?
There's just one for the end, just to get feedback on how useful this webinar has been. So I can launch that one just as we close. So just give me the nod.
So excellent. Thank you, Liz. So thank you very much indeed for everybody for joining today. I hope it was useful. As ever, we're going to produce a poll to let us know how useful you found it. If you've got any additional feedback, please do send us an email to let us know. But thank you for making the time to rejoin. We have recorded the webinar, so we will be posting the recording so you can listen back to any of the parts of the webinar. But do let us know how useful you find it, because that will help us inform our future webinars. And I just wanted to thank the team again for putting together the information for today's webinar and for answering all the questions that we got in the Q&A. So thank you very much indeed to the team. Have we got nearly everybody completed the poll, Liz?
We've got 80% done, so just over 100. So yeah, thank you everyone.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, everybody. And we'll end the poll there. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.